Coming up, we explain why Ben Simmons' return to Philadelphia is coming at just the right time for the Brooklyn Nets. We'll discuss the successes that they have had along the way over their last 11 games, and if in fact we can have a positive outlook and things to be thankful for this holiday season. All coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Brooklyn, yo.
Yes, friends. It is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day, where, of course, you will find over there Doug Norrie. He's the owner-operator of DFSR for all your daily fantasy sports rankings, and at Doug Norrie on Twitter. Gosh, does he have some gems for you over there. I am Adam Armbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. You can follow me at Adam Armbrecht on Twitter. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. We'll find out.
Buddy.
Ultimately, we thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are, of course, free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by Sweatblock. If you or someone you love is experiencing embarrassing sweat or odor, try Sweatblock. Save 20% with promo code LOCKEDON at sweatblock.com. Also available on Amazon. And I'm disappointed that I couldn't be a part of the celebration that was the Brooklyn Nets taking care of the Memphis Grizzlies. But as we said at the top, the first most important talking point is the performance of Ben Simmons and the trajectory that he is suddenly on.
Yeah, I talked about it after the game. It was an easy one to do solo on because at any time you have the guys kind of show up and play really well, it's considerably easier to talk about than than not. So you always root for the W's. But Simmons, as we head into this holiday weekend, as we head onto this little Nets mini road trip that they're about to go on, the timing for his return to Philadelphia really couldn't be better because we know that there's just like a lot of talk about this. Obviously, it's about as a high profile a move as you get moving from one team to another with Simmons specifically because of all the drama, that went on with this thing. And it's weird. It's funny because he is catching them. If you're worried about like sort of the makeup and you're worried about, I don't know, the non-basketball related stuff that had to go on with this story, he does actually catch Philly at kind of the perfect time here in terms of just the pressure being off. It helps that he's playing his best basketball this season by far. I mean, these last two games have easily been the best two games that he's had with the Nets. But dovetailing that with the state of the Sixers now, which we'll go through, it does kind of line up really well for him because that's going to be a really hostile crowd, right? That's going to be a really hostile crowd in Philly. They have no love lost. I have examples of this, which I'll also share here briefly. But yeah, he's catching him at a perfect time.
Yeah, it's interesting because I just had this thought in real time. We obviously have been waiting on Ben Simmons to turn this corner and frankly discussing about whether or not we thought it would ever be possible. Almost from one game to the next, it was all of a sudden a little bit more decisive going towards the basket, right? Just a little bit crisper on the offensive end and cleaning up some of those defensive fouling issues. And now we're starting to see, we can see that path going forward. I will comically note, and I know you're going to talk about the condition of Philly right now that makes this a good time to find them. It's almost ironic that if Ben Simmons was still struggling like he was prior to these last couple of games, I almost think like Philly, when he came in, would be like, maybe we'll just cheer this guy because he's not playing well. This has always been our opinion of him. And now he's a problem for somebody else. Whereas now, coming off of a couple of good games, it's almost like, the Philly fan base is going to be brutal towards him almost no matter what. But I guarantee now they're going to be ratcheted up because Simmons is showing some of the glimpses that you lost track of as things wound down in his time with the 76ers.
Yeah, for sure, dude. It was super easy at the beginning of the season because it looked like a mess. He was working back from injury. It was clear that he wasn't 100%. I think he wasn't 100% physically or sort of what he wanted to do basketball wise either. I think both of those things were problems. Those have been less of problems. It's not to say those problems won't creep back, right? I think this guy is in his own head to some degree about his basketball. And so I think that will probably always be a question that looms over the Ben Simmons experience. I think it'd be silly not to think that to be the case. There was just lots of examples of it at this point. But in terms of Philly, I mean, right now they are I'm not laughing about the injuries here, but like, it's just so crazy about what the NBA season will do to you, because when it's already been, two of these were already announced, and then Embiid was announced today. So Embiid, he's going to sit out this game. He's already been announced out. That happened 36 hours in advance of the game. So that was already known. And then they were already without James Harden, who's been out for some time now. And then Tyrese Maxey, who's going to miss, I think, 3 to 4 weeks. Yeah, Maxey's going to miss 3 to 4 weeks. And I believe that Harden's not coming back till December. So this is a team that's playing. The Nets are going to catch a Philly team here that's completely playing with their B team, right? Yeah. It's like Shake Milton, it's DeAnthony Melton, it's Tobias. I mean, Tobias Harris starts, but it's, you know, Daniel House. They're on a fill-in sort of scenario here. I don't know if it's going to be Trez that starts at center, if B-ball Paul Reed's going to start. I'm not sure exactly which direction they're going to go. It doesn't matter. Neither of those guys are Embiid. So the Philly is just in a total skeleton crew right now, which for Simmons, for all this other stuff that's gone on, to not have to have Harden out there, to not have to specifically have Embiid out there. Look, I'm not saying he doesn't want it. He might want it. I'm not speaking for Ben Simmons here at all. Like, he might invite the challenge. Most competitors do invite the challenge. I'm just saying, now that it has lined up this way, this is kind of a soft landing, right? And think about what we talked about last year when they first got Simmons, when we thought that he was going to come back. It never ended up happening. We kept thinking about where would be a soft landing for him to kind of come out. And because there was a game in Philly, we're like, then they go on a road trip to Orlando. That might be a place to sort of glide the glider down into the field, rather than onto, you know, some slippery tarmac. And I do think, to some degree, for Simmons to go back into the situation that, again, is already going to be very hostile and very much wanting to see failure from him 100%. I mean, these fans are so ginned up about Simmons that I think this does help him, even if some people would say, oh, you know, everyone put their best foot forward. Of course, the situation being as it is now, I think this is probably better overall for him.
Yeah, and you go back to these last couple of games, because I'm just thinking about, obviously, the correlation between, you know, it's also really good. I think we know we get back Kyrie Irving against the Grizzlies, but the game prior against the Portland Trailblazers, it's important that in his last 2 games where he looks like he's starting to get himself back together on the court, the Nets are also winning those games. And inside of those, you talk about the matchups, obviously, while Nurkic and someone like Steven Adams is going to present challenges, and they did in those games, it's the kind of thing that on the offensive end, Ben Simmons' quickness, what he represents on ball, really plays in. It plays into those matchups for him. So having a Joel Embiid out there on the court, just from a talent standpoint alone, is one thing, but specifically to the idea on the offensive end and where Ben Simmons needs his confidence to grow the most, we saw him finishing at the basket, right? Finishing around the rim, bringing that ball up the court, and about 2-3 steps across midcourt, making the instinctual decision. I got one defender up high. I got a lot of space in the lane. I can go and attack that. And you very quickly could see a game like this against Philadelphia become very physical for him, especially with Embiid in there. And then also, just from a confidence standpoint, become one of those games where, you're getting access, but guess what? You're getting swallowed up a lot. You're getting met at the rim a lot. So I agree with you 100% that this is the kind of little run here in the first 15, 20 games, as bad as it's looked at times, that you needed Simmons to go on to get that sense of, okay, this thing can get on track here. Because up until this point, I think you and I both were saying it may never quite get there. And that's a big difference now.
And not to mention that Embiid specifically is like the single worst matchup in the NBA for the Nets, like specifically for how they're constructed right now, even with, if Claxton's supposed to return, like Embiid on his own is easily the worst matchup that the Nets can have right now in terms of their personnel. So just frankly, just not having to play him for right now at this point in the season is a help. All right, we're going to want to get into some other pieces. I got to tell you real quick about how Philly fans responded to, I mean, what I thought was so clearly a joke, but you know how these things go, about the Philadelphia 76ers. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Turo. Turo is the world's largest car sharing marketplace. With Turo, you can book any car you want, wherever you want it, from a community of local hosts. You can browse a huge selection of vehicles for just about any occasion or budget across the US, UK, Canada. Coming soon to our friends over there in Australia. Book a spacious SUV or minivan for that family road trip if you're going out on one. Get a classic or luxury car for the special event. Show up in style, birthday, holiday. Find affordable economy cars if you're on a budget, or you're just trying to get to that A, to the always elusive point B. Test drive that new electric vehicle you've had your eye on to see how it fits your everyday life. Many Turo hosts can even deliver the car right to you. Every trip is backed by a liability insurance. Terms, conditions, and exclusions apply. Forget boring rental cars and find your drive at Turo.com.
So, coming up here in a second, we're going to take a look also at the runway ahead here for the Brooklyn Nets from a schedule standpoint between now and Christmas. A lot of opportunities potentially for this team to really start to build with some confidence here. And then we know Thanksgiving's coming up here on Thursday. So, a little bit of that of what are we thankful for around the Brooklyn Nets. Good thing this wasn't a week ago because it might have felt a lot different. Well, before we do, Doug, let's just lay out the landscape of how Doug Norrie applies jokes and whether or not it really lands just across the landscape.
Well, I just wrote on Twitter, weird that everyone on Philly all of a sudden can't play after Ben Simmons turns it up a notch. That was the, I was going to say too, that like Doc Rivers will probably sit it out too. Everyone's scared. I mean, if it's obvious that this is like a joke, not everyone gets it. I'll tell you, no one comes harder than the Philly fan. They, there's very little sarcasm in the tone over there. I don't want to, I don't want to throw an entire fan base underneath the bus here. But maybe the folks all the ones that have responded to me over this situation don't seem to find a lot of humor in the Ben Simmons situation. And this is why
no nuance.
This is why it's really more pointing out that like, this is a pretty intense fan base that will, and it goes back to just what I was saying. So I'm joking about the Twitter thing because obviously that's just a joke, right? These guys are all hurt, but it does speak to like the sort of the fan feeling and probably to some degree the organizational feeling around Simmons and Philly. Like there is a lot of love lost from that situation. That was about as brutal a breakup as you'll ever get in the NBA. I mean, it's unheard of for a guy to sit out for a whole season, basically because he's at odds. I mean, he was hurt too, but because he's at odds with the organization. I mean, it was both things, right? He's definitely hurt, and he clearly just does not want to play for the Sixers, right? He feels they threw him under the bus, Rivers specifically. I'm not even saying a right or wrong thing. I'm just saying that this was the situation, and these fans, I'm not sure there's probably ever been a fan base. I mean, there probably has, but a fan base that wants a guy to fail so bad. Like the Sixers fans, it is not even a gray area with this. They are dying for this guy to be terrible. Like it's very obvious. And that just bleeds through. Like that comes through into the stadium. That's definitely, I know these guys are athletes at a different level when it comes to just like ingesting, the general ether of comments that come out on you. And still like, this is so far and above and beyond what the normal kind of situation is, that it just has to be addressed because it really is like a city of basketball fans would love nothing more for this guy to just utterly fail. It's just the way it is right now.
I can remember a time when one man who refers himself as the King left Cleveland, and certainly there was some dismay from that fan base and some burning jerseys.
Like the thing with that is though, it wasn't on the table, and it wasn't on the table that he was going to fail because like with Simmons, I think they can smell blood in the water. Like they can see it's a little bit of a situation where they can see it as a possibility.
And here's the thing too, and I agree with you, but here's the thing too, just on that is it's this both and of. We've seen the sample size where this guy isn't good. And that was a disappointment when he was on the 76ers, right? But then the double down now is not only do we want him to be bad because he's not on our team anymore, it also justifies the idea of we don't need to feel as bad about him not being on our team anymore, right? Because that's always usually what's underneath it. We just talked about this last time. You're never like upset about a relationship you didn't like, that you're totally disgusted with, but okay, did Ben, stop putting on the pretty clothes for you and dolling himself up every night? And you thought maybe he's only a 6. Turns out though, you remember a time when he was a 9. Yeah. And the idea that he could get back to that level and he's not going to be a part of your team, that's where you're dreaming and holding on to this idea. He's never going to get back. He's never going to be good enough. The problems are always going to be there. And then it makes us feel even better about the fact that we don't have him on our team anymore. And
by the way, if you're the kind of person that thinks like this about athletes, I would challenge you to find another thing to do, like take up knitting or something, but like just do, try pickleball. Everyone seems to be into that. Like just do something else because there's no reason to ever feel like this about people outside of your life. Yeah. Like it's basketball, man. Like this is the other thing I tried to explain to people. I was like, this is basketball. We're just here to have fun. We love it. Like I love being able to talk about basketball every day. When you wish for people's demise that you don't know, it's time to do a little other mini check-in. So just that's just the little PSA for today. And if you ever hear me doing that, I would challenge you to let me know because I don't want to do that, but I don't think we do. Anyway, we got a bunch of other things to talk about here, but I did want to say, I just wanted to bring up that one part about the Philly the Philly faithful that I do think that this is one of these. It's kind of a rare situation in how they view it.
Sure. And it'd be interesting to see it, right? A really big game from Ben Simmons and some emotion from him could certainly be something too, just in terms of where he is in his progression and maybe, quote unquote, sticking it to the franchise that he feels like didn't necessarily treat him the best way
Can I
possible.
say one more thing? I know we're going on for that. This is my last thing. I will say to some degree, going the other way, he's in like sort of a lose-lose situation here because of who Philly doesn't have. I don't think there's anything to be done about that. Like, everyone
come out of this game on a big performance, look up. Yeah, of course you did without everybody. Right.
I do think like there's going to be a certain segment it's not going to matter like what he does because there'll be a built-in excuse. So anyway, that's my final thing.
So the other thing then we want to turn our attention to here is also, so the Brooklyn Nets are coming off of this stretch here where they win over Memphis. Obviously, they're going to be on the road going forward here for 76ers, Toronto, and then Indiana. But then they also bring themselves back into this really nice runway starting on the 27th of November all the way through December 9th. That's going to give them 2, 4, 6, 7 straight home games. They don't need to leave Brooklyn. There's some very beatable teams in there like Washington, like the Hornets, who they've seen before. Some big matchups. The Celtics, obviously, Orlando's in there too. And even even the Portland Trailblazers, again, coming back home. It's kind of really important here, dovetailing off of getting Kyrie back on the court for the first game after his suspension, having Ben Simmons start to get into a little bit better form here to dream on a really nice runway leading into mid-December where you can feel like a team. I did this before we got on, Doug. They are 7-4 over their last 11 games. Like, lost in all of this. They're 8-9. There's been so much going on, but I went and crunched the numbers on it. Coming into starting at that Pacers game that they won after losing the initial, they were averaging 122 points against defensively. Over the last 11 games, 106. And that includes giving up 153 points to the Kings, an absolutely demoralizing loss.
Yeah.
So in a lot of ways, like, it already feels like you wouldn't have noticed it to squint and hear all the noise around this team. You wouldn't have realized that they have figured out a lot of things and are playing pretty solid basketball, at least to the point where after this 3-game road trip, 7 straight home games, it's not unrealistic to say, oh, well, we should be trying to circle 5 out of 7. Like, think about this as a good basketball team with superstars on it that can win a lot of games. Blink of an eye, 3 games ago, we would have had a hard time thinking about it that way.
Yeah, if you look at, and that's a great point about the shift that's taken place just with their defense specifically. Like we joked about, not allowing teams to score 100 points. And even with that 150 plus disaster against the Kings, right now, just to kind of add to that point, right now the Nets are 8th in offensive efficiency on the season, and I believe they're 8th in defensive efficiency, as I sort of 9th in defensive efficiency. They're a top 10 team in both numbers, even with missing Kyrie for a bunch of games, even with Simmons coming off the bench and not looking like himself, even with these other pieces that have not, giving up 150 to Sacramento, a bunch of blowouts early in the season. Those are all in those stats. Like, those aren't even, date queried stuff like you were doing. Like, they're a top 10 team in offense and defense right now. I don't think anyone would think about the team like that just based on how the seasons have gone, because it's either been like really good or awful and very little in between. But that's just in the aggregate. They're top 10 in both. Now they're still under 500. The point differential is right around even. But like, do you think of them as a top 10 team in either thing? Like, would you think about them like that over the course of a season? I know I wouldn't.
I'd be called out if I suggested they are.
It would sound nuts. It would sound nuts. It's like the Nets are a top 10 in offense and defense. It's like, yeah, okay. No, they actually are when it comes to offensive and defensive efficiency.
And as we think about going forward here for things that we're thankful for in a second, it is also that idea too. Let's be realistic. They've had some violent pendulum swing kind of games, right? Give up 153, lose to the Lakers, then all of a sudden beat a couple of good teams. We know the Memphis game, who wasn't there for the Grizzlies. And you can go back and look at the start of the season and specifically look at the teams that they played as we did back then and said, these are playoff caliber teams they're struggling with. But the schedule is the schedule. And if you can't get fat on some of the bad teams, if you can't get the easy quote unquote wins, well, then it's even more of a disaster. So at least from that standpoint, you can say you've had this mixture of high caliber teams that have been healthy when you've seen them, some real dumpsters. Okay. And you come out in the wash. Do I think that in another 10 to 15 games, we'll be looking at them as still being a top 10 in both categories? We'll see. Like, it'll solidify it. But there's a direct correlation between Ben Simmons starting to improve here on both ends of the floor and thinking about how you can maintain that top 10-ish kind of efficiency going forward.
Yeah, you can't count wins against the team. Like, it doesn't matter. They can be neutral.
Believe
for
me,
you.
if
Yeah.
I preach this on the One Giant podcast every single week, baby. You don't give those wins back.
Yeah, wins can't be counted against you. They might just be neutral wins. Like, they might not move the needle for you the other way, but you can't count. Like, you can't really take it away from a team for getting a W. All right, we'll get through some of the stuff that we're thankful for as we head into this holiday season. Right before that, got to tell you something else we're thankful for. LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster. You want to be 100% certain that you access the best qualified candidates available out there. Look, trying to find people to fill in jobs at your company can be stressful. It can be difficult. It can feel like you just have a sea of candidates out there. LinkedIn Jobs helps you dial it in. You add the job and you add the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. They have simple tools, screening questions. It makes it really easy to focus and dial in candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and eventually hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs, wait for it, #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNBA to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply.
And of course, you made the Locked On Nets podcast your first listen of the day. For your second listen today, why don't you check out the Locked On Sports Today? Why? Because from the games that matter most to the biggest stories in sports, go beyond the scoreboard and behind the scenes with local experts and insights only the Locked On Podcast Network can provide. Locked On Sports Today, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcast needs fulfilled. So, Douglas, as we like to do, it is, of course, the holiday season, and we're grateful. We're always thankful. And we're probably going to be seeing each other. Doug and I, a little behind the scenes of the podcast here. Every year that we're with one another, we do the wishbone together. And we get in and we pull and we tug, we pull and we tug. But no matter who wins it, the wish is always for another successful year of the Locked On Nets podcast. Is there? I'll let you go first because I'm curious where you'll go. Is something that you are grateful for around the Brooklyn Nets 17 games into the season?
I'm just grateful. I mean, look, after a summer of discontent and a Kyrie disaster here with the 8-game suspension and Ben Simmons, will he or won't he look like himself again? As we head in, and these things can change in a millisecond. Like, we know this, right? Like, this stuff, basketball, you're only as good as the last game. But I will say, heading into this weekend with this back-to-back, it is nice to at least have pretty close to the full semblance of the team here with a new coach that we haven't seen with the entire team really yet. And with these guys playing like that, I am thankful that we are getting at least a glimpse. Now, I don't know what's going to happen here in the future. I'm still not 100% confident that this is the final group that we see at the end of the season. I don't think there's been enough to really feel that. That's fine. I think that right now, heading into the back-to-back here before the Thanksgiving break, that we know that at least we're gonna have a chance to see it, right? Like, that's been the whole thing. Like, will we get a chance to see it? It's unbelievable that you have to ask this about a team after X amount of years about whether or not you're ever going to get enough of a sample size to know if it's going to be really good or not. We still don't know. At least now, going into this next game, they are at a point now where it's like, it looks like, at least on a player level, they're mostly firing on all cylinders, and they have a new coach. So we don't have to do the Nash dance anymore. I am thankful for that piece of it, just from getting to see something that I think we can sink our teeth into. That sinking teeth into it might not be a great result, but at least we're going to get a chance to try.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. The speculation, the what if. Hey, at least it looks like we're at a point where we're going to say, for better or worse, whatever the results, we're going to get to see it finally. Listen, obviously, the first thing I'm grateful for is Yuta Watanabe.
Of course.
I mean, if I could invite one Brooklyn Net over to my house, it would be Kevin Durant. But then, if he wasn't available, I would go to Yuta.
I would invite them both before my wife and kids. It'd be so much better. Like,
there'd be so much more to talk about.
Forget about the aunts and uncles. Things. I mean, that one's not even close. But like, now we're getting down into like the wife and kids territory. Yeah, for sure.
But no, I mean, I think I'll say I'm excited for the fact that they added in pieces that are all contributors to this team. And just it adds on to what you're saying about, hey, Kyrie makes it through the suspension. He's going to be back out there. Ben Simmons is looking pretty good. Kevin Durant is playing the best basketball maybe of his career, which is always fun to say as he keeps getting a year older and people keep trying to dumpster about whether or not he's going to age well as an NBA superstar. But these other supporting cast members, there's been on and off years where there's been hits or misses. And most of what it looks like Sean Marks did this offseason looks like they're going to be hits, and it hits in a meaningful way. And when you think back to the prior years, even in the small sample size of the peak of their powers, there was still a little bit of this, but is the supporting cast perfect? And by the way, it's not perfect right now, but a Yuta Watanabe, and when you think about what Royce O'Neal has done, especially as a facilitator, which makes you maybe rethink how they can still have enough guys to help set up the offense when called upon. All those little elements make it okay that Joe Harris has struggled a little bit early in the season to find his shot, that Seth Curry looks like, I said to you off podcast, maybe is going to be a guy that's just going to have some type of injury all year long. Those have been things that I'm grateful for. And I'll tee up the next one. You mentioned Jacque Vaughn. I'm really grateful that a guy who has, in his own words, like been a good soldier and just done what's been asked of him. I think it's really, I don't know what would have happened with Ime Udoka. I think we're better not touching it. And, you know, as far from where this organization was. And I think it's a really nice thing to see a guy that when you look at his record from Orlando and you go, this guy's a terrible coach. Guess what? He's come in. The players seem to be responding to him. And all of a sudden, to your point, it just feels like all the biggest boxes right now are being checked. And that's just something that we've never been able to do for the entirety of Steve Nash's tenure as head coach, for the entirety of Sean Marks' tenure as GM.
Yeah, it's good. You're totally correct in how, one, I had just kind of forgotten about the Ime thing. I mean, not on a macro level, but on a micro level, in talking about Jacque Vaughn, I really wasn't thinking about Jacque Vaughn in relation to Ime Udoka because that just went away. And I think that, like you said, probably for the best in terms of just story pieces, right? Like
just not having something else that's on the table.
Yeah, like basketball wise, I think, it's hard to argue with his output as a coach. But I agree, there was other stuff that was going to come with it. But the Vaughn experience has been great. I mean, it's definitely different basketball stylistically. There's a different energy to it. I just think, frankly, for some people, it was going to be like an anyone but Nash situation, right? Like anyone, and I'm not going to put myself in that category necessarily, but we were definitely starting to trend there to some degree later than a lot of other fans were. It was always felt like there was never a situation that could really grasp it. But in seeing the Vaughn experience and seeing at least how the players, and specifically Durant, who spoke about him, directly in the Chris Haynes thing, it does feel like there's a different vibe in general, right? Like the vibe feels different just between the player coach piece and on the court as well.
Some people mentioned this too. We can close out on grateful for, again, neither you nor I thought that Kevin Durant needed to clarify his conversation with Chris Haynes, but he came out afterwards and had another on the boardroom discussing. He said he wasn't throwing Chris Haynes under the bus. It was a scheduled interview that he was going to do with him. And he even said, again, and we discussed this, but he reframed it as, I get it. I mentioned certain guys like Claxton, like Joe Harris, and I say, what do we expect? It's like, it makes it sound like I'm throwing them under the bus, like they're not good enough to play with me. It's not that. It's that there's a pressure on me, and I expect that pressure to perform at a high level and everything else that's going on. We want to get to that place. And he went back. He actually glossed over Joe and then went back to him and said, Joe, coming off the injury, trying to get himself back healthy. Like, it was a reminder of how we often forget with Kevin Durant. He's incredibly in tune. He's similar to LeBron James in that way. He's very in tune with the game to game, with how the script went, with where the box score is, with where they fell down from an efficiency standpoint, defensive assignments, like all those things he's dialed in on. And as much as anything, it looks like what he was dialed in on is the idea of you need not drag anybody else. Like, you can drag me if you want. That's what my role, the expectation is. When I'm on the court, we win basketball games. So, and again, you and I were not in the lot of saying like, ugh, I don't love the look of this. No. But I think that Kevin Durant, if you want to talk leadership, I'm grateful that he just came out and was like, hey, case you're wondering, this is what I meant by that, and this is what I think we can do. And you're seeing those results. That was a nice little cherry on top.
Yeah, I think that like we read it. That's how I read it to begin with, right? I think that definitely depended what lens.
And you led that charge there as well. And but let's be clear, I was willing to look at it from the other little sides of it, but there was a certain demographic that was like, this is the worst possible interview you could have given, which seemed very far afield.
Yeah, that never really resonated with me, although I guess I understood it when it was presented back to me that way. It was I just was trying to judge it based on my initial reaction of it, which was not any reaction at all. I was like, yeah, it's true. These guys are Edmund Sumner, and that they know who they are. Like I'm glad they're on the Nets. It's not that. It's like you can't have 18 or 14 Kevin Durant's on your team. Like it's just the way it works out. I just didn't think there was anything with it. All right. We are going to be back. We've had a little funky schedule with the lives just because of the West Coast trip and then the solo episode from the other night.
I had to bail. I had to bail hard late, and Doug picked up the baton.
It's all good. We talked about when we see one set of footprints in the sand, right? It just depends who's carrying who. Okay. We will be back on YouTube live though after the Tuesday game. So check in after that. That will be, I'll put the link in the show notes. Go follow on Twitter, either at Locked On Nets on Twitter or either the handles that you see down here at Doug Norrie, at Adam Armbrecht. We'll put the links over there. We've been getting great engagement over on those, and we really get excited to do them. So make sure you're checked in for that. That'll be following the Sixers Nets game on Tuesday, and we'll see about Wednesday leading into the holiday. We'll try to get something up there as well. So make sure you follow Locked On Nets over on YouTube.
You have to get through your fear to see the beauty on the other side. Why, that's Papa from The Good Dinosaur, as voiced by Jeffrey Wright.
Oh, one of the Nets fan. That's fan Jeffrey Wright. If you're listening to the show, Jeffrey, love to have you on. All right, that's a shameless plug. We will be back again tomorrow talking. Oh, sorry, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.